Good. Thank you, Brittany. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Mccleskey. My pronouns are he and him, and I work in youth services along with my colleague Mike at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. If you don't know, if you've never been to the Los Angeles LGBT Center, consider this your invitation. You're welcome to show up anytime. I've seen some people in the chat that are friends of ours and actually part of our coalition, so that's awesome. We represent the CAN Coalition. The center has been around a little over 50 years, and it is the largest organization of its kind serving LGBTQ folks. And our mission statement is that we are building a world where LGBT people thrive as healthy and equal and complete members of society.
Good morning or afternoon from wherever you are in this country. Mike Freeman, he, him. I see some familiar folks and a lot of new friends, so we're really excited to be here with you all today. And so the CAN Coalition, we are in Los Angeles and we work to bring multiple sectors of the community together to create safe and affirming spaces for LGBTQ youth. And we work through initiatives to educate and reduce substance misuse amongst this population. So welcome to our presentation. So today we're going to cover a few different things. We're going to do it a little different than we might at the CADCA forum or other presentations that we've done. Is we want to lean on the strategy side today so that you all can have some tangible items that you can take back to your community and really hopefully enact with the youth that you work with. So we're going to do an overview of SOGI, which is sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. We'll talk through a little bit of LGBTQ youth and some substance indicators. And then we'll move into our strategies. So we're going to look at advocating for students in schools, including youth in the conversation, making an impact with language to affirm youth identities, and supporting youth who come out to you. And then we'll have time for Q&A. We absolutely strive to have an interactive session. So we're going to have a bunch of different things using the chat feature to be able to connect with you this afternoon.
And speaking of that, we're going to start right away with some questions in the chat. So I'm going to pop in a few questions. I'll start with the first one. And I want you to answer the question if it relates to you or to someone in your life, and just indicate that in the chat. So here is the first question. Do you know anyone in your life personally who is LGBTQ identified? So you could put yes or no or maybe in the chat for that one. Wow, look at those yeses. That's awesome. Love that. Great, many, wonderful, good. Someone's proud. Thank you, Elena. All right, that's great. Well, that's probably why you are here, and some of you are in the LGBTQ community, so that's fantastic. And thank you for those of you that are still introducing yourself. Okay, here's the next question that I'm putting in the chat. Do you work with youth who are LGBTQ identified? Do you work with youth? All right, so glad to see that as well. Some of you don't anymore. Most of you do. Some of you not specifically. Okay. Well, for all of you that do work with young people, we're really hopeful that this presentation will be helpful for you. For those of you that do not currently work with LGBTQ youth, thank you specifically for being here. That you want to know, even though right now you may not work with young people, how to work with them best. That's incredible. Thank you. Here is the next question that I'm putting in the chat. Do you have a grant funding or programs that requires you to have a youth coalition, youth input, or anything similar to that? So just trying to find out who was in the room when it comes to youth. Okay, good. A lot of us have funding that requires youth input. Glad to see Chris is working on that. I think we all believe in youth input, whether it's required from a grant or not, but also it's great that funding is requiring that more and more right now. Okay, next question. On a scale of 1 to 5, what is your comfortability with language to support and affirm LGBTQ youth? 1 being 0, or 1 being you're not comfortable, and 5 being you're very comfortable. Okay, good. Lots of 4s, a couple 2s. Excellent. I love that on our 1 to 5 scale, we're getting some 6, 7, and 8s. That's great. That's fun. Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully by the time we're done our presentation today, you're feeling at 5 or at 10, whatever the scale is that you're using. All right, very good. And last question, do you know, here we go, do you know why LGBTQ youth often misuse substances more than their non-LGBTQ youth counterparts? All right, good. Some of you have already started to put some answers in there. Some of you really want to understand. That is great. All right.
I'd love to see that we have such a wide range of folks in your profession and your knowledge. And so as we move into the presentation, we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and has the same foundation at the start. So whether you're extremely familiar with LGBTQ competency or this is a newer thing to do to you, we want to just, have a space where we all start together, learn, and then as we migrate through the rest of this presentation, that we'll all have these similar fundamentals to be able to discuss. So this spectrums of SOGI is sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And as we talk about these different components, we ask that you think of things as being on a spectrum, right? So not necessarily the binary of he, she, or black or white, or day or night, but that a spectrum exists in between all of these components. So the first one that we're going to talk about is sex assigned at birth. And this is basically what the doctor assigns you or the medical professional assigns us when we're born. They look at our anatomy and they determine you're male or you're female, right? Some folks have variations in genitalia or chromosomes or internal anatomy, and these folks are intersex individuals, right? And so intersex is an umbrella term to describe bodies that don't really fit into that box of male or female. And then we have gender identity. So gender identity, this is in our brain, how we know ourselves to be, how we know ourselves to identify, right? So we know that most commonly folks might identify as a woman or a girl or a man or boy, but there are vast majorities of genders and how people identify. And again, that spectrum starts to take place in gender identity because, somebody might be in the middle of woman and girl and non-binary or man and boy, right? And so it's not just necessarily picking that box. So someone who's non-binary is someone who might have a combination, an absence of, or simply be on the binary of male and female genders. Babies are not actually born with gender identity. This is something that we start to navigate and understand around 2.5 years of age to 6 years of age. And two concepts to familiarize yourself with when thinking about gender identity. So we have someone who's cisgender is someone whose sex assigned at birth aligns with their gender identity. So someone who is assigned female at birth and their gender identity is a woman. Same thing, someone who is assigned male at birth and their gender identity is a man. So they're a cisgender man, a cisgender woman. Whereas transgender is when someone who is assigned a sex at birth does not align with their gender identity. So if you were assigned male at birth and you identify as a woman or girl, this is someone who's transgender. And the same thing if you're assigned female at birth and you identify as a man or a boy, then you'd be a trans man.
All right, next we're going to talk about gender expression. Gender expression is the way outwardly that someone communicates their gender to the outside world. Most often this is based on kind of traditional gender roles, how someone dresses, how they act, they behave, how they interact. The most important thing to remember is that someone's gender expression does not have to or always coincide with their gender identity. So there might be somebody who identifies as a female or a girl or a woman, but they have very masculine gender expressions. And again, these are traditional, what we think of but your gender expression. And we see this, if you're working with young people who are in the community, you probably see this as well. Their gender expression is very fluid. Some days they might come to school or to a youth group dressed in what is traditionally feminine expression clothes, and then the next time they come out and they're very masculine. And so think of this on a spectrum, and to know that their gender expression is one of the ways, particularly with young people, that they express who they are. The next thing is sexual orientation. So this is our final component. It is based on the physical, spiritual, emotional attraction that somebody has. Mostly we think of this as gay or lesbian or straight, but there are many other orientations, such as bisexual, which most of us have heard about. But a couple other things that a lot of young people are starting to use in their vocabulary are pansexual. So that is someone attracted to an individual regardless of their other person's sexual orientation or gender identity. So pansexual covers a wide variety. And then asexual, and that is somebody who may not have sexual attraction to others at this point. They may have romantic feelings or attraction, but they may not have a sexual attraction to someone. And so that term for that is asexual. We place sexual orientation on the genderbread person, and I know a lot of you said in the chat you use the genderbread, which is great, in the heart, because this is our sexual orientation is our feelings and what makes us our heart flutter, and we know that a lot of times sexual orientation develops between the ages of 6 and 12 years old.
Thank you, Kevin. And this, we did put this in the forms through CADCA, so you have access to the genderbread person as well. So just to tie all these together, are looking at some SOGI principles that each of these, sex assigned at birth, gender identity, expression, sexual orientation, and behavior are all distinct from one another, right? And that, like we said, that they exist on spectrums, right? That SOGI identities, it's about the language that we use to describe our identities on these spectrums, and they vary from person to person because it a lot of times is very individualized, and that they're intersectional, right? That SOGI is not the only piece that makes us up, but it also intersects with other identities that we have, like race, class, and our ability to create life experiences, and that entirety makes us up as a whole person. That this is universal. Every single person that walks this planet has a SOGI, right? So we all have an identity development, and we all have something that's ongoing as part of our own human experience. And finally, that these are self-defined, right? So how one understands and articulates and shares their SOGI is self-determined by who they are. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little later.
So obviously, part of what we want to talk about today is LGBTQ youth and substance misuse. And in thinking about this presentation, I mean, Mike and I have spent a lot of time reflecting on our own experiences and our own stories. And I know for me, when I was first starting to come out just to myself, I was a little bit older than a lot of folks come out. I was in my 30s. And I wanted to go to a place that felt safe, where I could be myself, I could explore who I was, I could maybe meet some other LGBTQ folks. So where did I go? I went to a gay bar because I didn't know where, actually I couldn't think of anywhere else to go. I didn't really know other places where queer people gathered. And so I discreetly looked on Yelp for a gay bar in my community. And I remember going to this one bar, and I was scared to death. I had never been in a gay bar before by myself. I had gone with other LGBT folks, just friends, but never by myself, and I'd never been to this gay bar. And I went to this bar and just sat there drinking, trying to be comfortable with myself, trying to be comfortable with the environment, trying to get up the nerve to talk to somebody else. And as fate would have it, this really nice guy was sitting next to me, just started talking to me, and I kind of opened up to him about the struggles I was going through, because it was a struggle for me, and trying to figure out who I was and accept myself, and he was great. And so I started doing that. I started seeking out this gay bar or other gay bars, and I could see really quickly how easily it was going to be to kind of merge my coming out experience, my identity of my sexual orientation, kind of with alcohol, almost needing alcohol to help me have the courage to talk to people, and that the bar was becoming the safe place. And so when we think about young people, we have to realize that for young people, they're looking at their adult community for an example and a role model. They are often looking for places to mirror their own existence. And so again, in the queer community, oftentimes that is in places where substances abound. We know that young people are seeking affirmation from adults. They're seeking support from them. They're seeking to get a glimpse of what it may look like to be LGBTQ in their adulthood. So we're very aware that the young people we work with, they see billboards, they see ads telling them that if they use substances, they could be the life of the party. And specifically, we also know that these companies specifically target the LGBTQ community and say things like, hey, enjoy Pride by drinking this alcohol. And we know that there are alcohol bottles that are decorated with the Pride flag, and wine bottles. And there's a lot of companies, especially I saw it this year, so many companies want to be supportive of the community. And so they come out at Pride with something, a label and a design specific for the Pride month. But when a lot of those are substances, this isn't good for our young folks. And this is what they're connecting. They're beginning to connect their identity, our community, with substances. However, what they don't realize is that their brains, if they're under 25, are not fully developed. And that a young person under 25, as we all know in this field, using marijuana, using alcohol, vaping, is affecting them in a way that doesn't affect the older folks, the adults in the community. And it affects their body in much more significant ways. So it's important that we create spaces where youth can feel that sense of a belonging that's separate from substance misuse. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit today. So there is a large study that was done of over 10,000 LGBTQ youth, and it was conducted by the Human Rights Campaign. And it found, when young people were asked, what is the most important problem facing in their lives right now, 21% reported being bullied at school. So we know that bullying is a huge issue for young people. We also found that 26% reported non-accepting families. So we're going to talk about family rejection. We're going to focus on bullying and family rejection. 18% also reported fear of being found out or open as LGBTQ. So this idea of students and young people experiencing bullying at school, we know it's real. It may not always appear the way the media has portrayed bullying, right? It's not always going to be the bully walking down the hallway at school, pushing kids, shoving them, slamming their locker. A lot of it is going to be online. A lot of it is going to be, some of it's going to be really kind of passive aggressive, but bullying still happens. And one of the things that we have found is that LGBTQ youth are nearly 3 times as likely to have missed school in the past month than other students because they felt unsafe at school. We also know that LGBTQ youth had lower grade point averages than students who reported being less harassed at school. And LGBTQ youth were nearly twice as likely to report that they did not plan to pursue any post-secondary education because of the experience that they had at school being harassed.
So looking at family rejection, as we talk about spectrums and continuums, right, there's a lot of different ways that we can see things happening within the LGBTQ community. And one of that is when a child comes out to their family, there's a myriad of ways in which the family might react to their child being LGBTQ, right? Some may completely accept them, others may completely reject them, and some may reject them at first and then over time come to accept their child's identity, right? So first, let's just talk about parents in general, right? So a parent has their newborn baby, and as soon as they have these babies, all my friends have babies, all my friends are like, oh, they're gonna do this and this and this with their life, right? So parents are already starting to map out how they want their child to be. So they imagine them having a beautiful career. Maybe it's a doctor or a lawyer. They imagine them getting married and having kids of their own, right? And so these are all things that parents are putting out there. They're making their dreams and they're hoping that their child kind of follows suit with that, right? So in our country, at least, often we're very individualized and we don't necessarily follow the dreams that our parents put for us, right? So when we don't become that doctor, our parents' dream might burst a little bit. When we don't get married or have kids, that dream might burst a little more, right? That individual self is coming in. So then let's take that to, sexual orientation or gender identity. So let's say a child that's assigned female at birth comes out to their parents and says, I'm a transgender man, I want to use he and him pronouns. There's often a grieving period for parents, right? So that dream is birthed. And again, there's a variety of reasons in which they might grieve, but often parents might see themselves as losing that daughter, right? That daughter is telling them they're now their son. But hopefully that over time, the parent comes to see that they're not losing their child, but they're actually getting a stronger child because that child is able to be their authentic self, right? And many youth who come out as LGBTQ are not met with kindness and unconditional love from their families. I mean, we work in LA, and unfortunately, there's a lot of homeless LGBTQ youth because their parents kick them out. They're not accepting of their child, right? So one study that we look at a lot is from the Family Acceptance Project. And you may have heard this. And the reason why we use this data is because there's not a lot of studies still that have been done around family rejection and the positivity or the negativity in which that impacts the young child. So in this study, it found that lesbian, gay, and bisexual adults who reported higher levels of family rejection during adolescence were 8.4 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 5.9 times more likely to have reported higher levels of depression, and 3.4 times more likely to use illegal substances. And this is compared to adolescents or adults who reported lower or no levels of family rejection during adolescence, right? And so youth become adults and then they carry this burden with them, right? And so then they're more likely to get into a space and participate in one of these negative consequences that can ruin their lives, right? And so there are a lot of things that we can do to strengthen and support our LGBTQ community. So I want to take the things that we just said about family rejection and put it into a vignette. And I want to ask you, I know that we have a variety of folks on, so if you're a teacher, if you're a youth worker, if you are a therapist, put your own lens on with this vignette, okay, and adapt it to what would work for you. So imagine that you're working with a family unit of two heterosexual parents, Antonio and Miriam, and their 15-year-old child, Alex. Alex was assigned female at birth and has a masculine presenting gender expression. Alex has been having issues at school with other students and has failed a few exams. So Antonio and Miriam, they came in wanting to address the issues that Alex is having at school, but the initial concern has taken a turn. During this conversation, Alex shares with you and the parents that they're transgender and want to use the pronoun he and him. So with your professional hat on, I want to ask you to think about a few things. So how would you respond to Alex and the family? And please answer these two questions and populate them in the chat. So what steps do you take to acknowledge what Alex has shared? And then what steps do you take to ensure that the family is supported? Give you a moment to let that sink in. Yes, thank you. Well, first model calling Alex he or him, right? So we're respecting the pronouns that he's sharing with us. Respecting the pronouns. Validating their LGBTQ plus identities. Celebrate his courage, honesty, and integrity. Absolutely. From a teacher's lens, thank him for coming out to us and say how brave he is for doing that. Oh, the chat is moving. I can't read. And then have a list of community resources for both the child and family. Absolutely. So having a list of resources just on hand or being able to get that to the family is so beneficial to be able to help them through their journey. Absolutely. So I'm seeing a lot of respect, celebration, affirming and support Alex. Listen first and exude non-judgment. That's beautiful. Thank Alex for his bravery. Underscore how important the family support is. Yes, that's huge, right? And so just keeping that family intact, I just spoke about the homelessness, right, of LGBTQ youth and whatever we can to reunify families and keep them together for both the safety of that youth and for the family unit to stay together is absolutely vital. Thank you all. Yeah, so the reaction from the parents would also play a role in how one would react. Absolutely. And again, I think someone mentioned, right, having resources. So having resources is a way to kind of successfully not just close the dialogue, right? Because you're having that dialogue and you might have interaction at that moment, but also this is an ongoing process, right? To make sure that both Alex and the family have a support system around them. So before we get into strategies, I want to share two statistics with you that I think you might find very positive, right? And so knowing that the work that we're doing early on, interventions and prevention with youth, that every year a teen starts to, every year a teen waits to start using alcohol, decreases the chances that they'll develop an alcohol use disorder by 14%. And every year that a teen waits to try drugs, decreases the chances that they'll develop a drug use disorder by 4 to 5%. And so I think the strategies that we're about to cover play a big role into having community and having youth know that they're not alone or siloed, but that there are ways to mitigate them from succumbing to alcohol or drug disorders.
And I just want to say, like Mike said, thank everybody for what you're putting in the chat. If we were in a room together, we would all be teaching each other, right? So Mike and I are facilitating this conversation, but y'all obviously have a lot of great ideas, resources. I agree, PFLAG is a great place. You know, it's hard for parents, and so, but we get calls from a lot of parents who want to be supportive of their young folks coming out, and they don't know how to. So part of our job is connecting those parents. And like Mike has said, and like someone said in the chat, for parents to understand the impact of rejection on a young person is so crucial. So part of what we should all be doing in this work is making sure families understand that their impact and their role. So thank you for all that. So as we get into strategies right now, we're going to cover what we strongly believe are upstream approaches in prevention. By working with youth in their early years, we want to help provide them with leadership opportunities, community building opportunities, skills, and spaces to affirm their identities. We know if we do these things, they're going to be less likely to misuse substances because they're going to gain that positive sense of self and feel connected to other people. So today we're going to cover 4 strategies when working with LGBTQ youth. The first is advocating for students in schools. The second is including youth in the conversation. The third is making an impact with language to affirm youth identities. And the last is supporting youth who come out to you. So the first is advocating for students in schools. Many of you probably work already with students in schools, and others may be outside of the classroom working with youth and maybe youth groups. But whether you're in the school or not, we believe that it's really important for you to understand the school environment. That can be a huge factor in supporting LGBTQ youth because so much, as we know, happens in schools. So on the micro and individual level, we work with students who are part of GSAs or LGBT clubs. GSA stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliances. And we provide training to both students and to teachers in schools who are actively working with youth in the community. Affirming youth who they are is vital to their positive sense of self and a functional preventative measure for this community. So what we do is our program directly supports students and teachers. We provide training on LGBTQ competency for teachers and staff. And then we also support GSA clubs by going in and working with them either monthly or weekly and just helping them form their club, develop strategies for reaching out to the school, building leadership development in there. Every club is kind of different. Some are just starting out, some are thriving, some are maybe starting to fizzle out. And so we come in and work with them at every level. And every year what we do is we conduct an outreach to our local school systems. So we will call all of the schools in our service area, and we'll ask them if they have a GSA club, do they have a GSA advisor we can be in contact with? And if not, we often will ask for the counselor. So we're connected to someone at the school who is working with LGBTQ youth and support them in whatever ways that we can do. When we're working with the clubs, we're trying to affirm identities there. We talk about inclusivity, building safe spaces, prevention of substances, and many more topics. And if you don't have the direct tools to create these kind of trainings that we do, there's probably organizations in your community that can do these kind of trainings. And also, now that we're all very familiar with being virtual, if not in your community, you can go outside your community to organizations like ours that might be able to help train both students and staff. And I'll tell you, once you're doing this kind of work, the news spreads. Schools will start approaching you and reaching out to you because they find out that you're doing something that they really need. And if you're going into schools and you're providing some aid or offering programs, it's crucial to speak the youth's language. And we're going to share a little bit more about inclusive language, but make sure language develops and evolves constantly. And so we're always learning things from the young people about language. And so you want to make sure you're speaking the language of youth. On a macro level, it's important that we understand the policies and laws of our state and our local school districts. That can be very, very helpful. So depending on where you live in the country, some states are very advanced in their laws to protect and support LGBTQ students, and some of you unfortunately are not. So let the laws guide you on legal questions around bullying and harassment, protection on sexual orientation and gender identity, health and education. When we go in and we train teachers and staff and administrators, often we get asked questions about the law. And so it's really helpful to know both the state laws, the school district laws, and then obviously refer to the administrators. So we've provided these two websites here, and you can look at your state and find out what the laws are for your schools and your states and what the rights are of students in every state and in every school. And these also, Mike, are going to be in the handout that's been provided. Yep. Okay. So then you want to find out what the particular policies are in the particular school district that you work in. Many districts will publish this on their website, their policies around harassment and bullying and inclusion. And suppose your state may have really strong laws to protect LGBTQ students. Double check that these laws are being implemented at the district level, because often they are not. And then you can advocate for that. If it's a state law, it should be being implemented at the district level. And even in California, we've seen school districts that defy state laws. There are definitely we have a lot of pockets of conservative districts throughout our state. So part of what your role can be as an advocate for these students is making sure the school districts are following state laws.
Absolutely. And just to add to what Kevin was saying about that we phone bank and call schools and stuff, like we don't do that all on our own, right? That's where we lean on our community and recruit volunteers to help us, because we know that we don't have enough human power to do that with just our staff. So this is why really leaning on a coalition or volunteers or the community who really care about this work comes to play. So moving into including youth in the conversation. So our programming and services have always been very youth-centric in that they're built for youth, right? But we've realized that we can't just build programs for youth, that we need to include youth in the dialogue so that the programs that are in existence are something that they want to go to and that are actually effective for them and where they can learn and just affirm their identity. So youth workers can do this in a lot of different ways, and we'll share a few different ways that we've done, and hopefully this helps you as well, just connecting with youth in your communities. So at the beginning of this presentation, we asked how many of you have a youth coalition or work with youth, and a lot of people said yes, right? And so we do as well through one of our grants. We have to have a youth contingent to our coalition, and I will tell you that was not an easy task at first. It was very challenging to get youth to buy in, to want to come and participate, right? And so we started to try different things, and it's okay to not win at first all the time, right? But slow and steady, we were able to get there. And so we created flyers like the one on the left side of the screen that were encouraging to youth, and we would give incentives. If it was in person, we provided food. We pivoted digitally over COVID, but we offer letters of recommendation for jobs or for college, right? That's something a lot of youth are really interested right now, especially as they're navigating to the ends of their high school years. And we just provide them with a space that is affirming to their identity. One of the unique things about holding these types of meetings are youth come from different schools, right? So they're able to learn from different students about just their own individual experiences, but also the climate in their school. And one of our goals is to facilitate these dialogues so that the youth are able to learn from other students and bring that back to their fellow peers and their teachers if there are things that need to be adjusted or to be looked at on their campuses. And so over time, this group has become steady. We've maintained a good amount of people that have come in. And every single meeting, the conversation adapts to what the need of the students are, right? So while we do incorporate prevention and substance discussion into pretty much every meeting, that's not necessarily always the focus, right? Because we know that there are so many different layers and needs of youth. So we really try to meet them where they are so that we're working together to create agendas. One of the things that we recently did with our youth leadership team is create a social norm campaign, which is the image on the right side of the screen. And we talked about youth to youth, and we were just brainstorming. We want to share some positive data. We want to share something that their peers will digest and take and hopefully actually not just look at and toss, but maybe take to heart, right? And so the youth were the ones that came up with these cute animals and this language on sober spaces and finding a sober space that's free from prejudice and discrimination, right? And staff did some research on the data, right? So on the bottom it says between the years of 2002 and 2019, alcohol use by youth aged 12 to 20 declined by 10%, and brought that into the dialogue and checked in with the youth, like, is this the data that we think that we should use, right? So we're really working together cohesively to build these groups and to make sure that the youth feel that they are a stakeholder, because without them, like, it's a little more difficult to just steer a ship without knowing exactly what their needs are. And so currently we're working on creating a billboard with our coalition. And so we know that it's important to go through all the channels of the adult coalition, staff, the youth leadership team, right? And continually to circle around with the messaging and what the brainstorming looks like, so that when the final product comes out, that it's something that is palpable for the general community and that we know that our youth are proud of what they're creating.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about making an impact with language to affirm youth identities. And just based on the chat, I know a lot of this you're all doing already and you're aware of, but there's a lot of folks that are in this seminar, so maybe this is new to them. But we want to respect and affirm LGBTQ youth and community by addressing them in the pronouns that they use. As we talked about before, that language is connected to culture, and it's a vehicle for our values, our thoughts, and identities. It's always changing, and language reflects a changing society. And usually changes to language are met with resistance. And so maybe you are feeling resistance to changing the way that we use pronouns. Maybe you've heard other people expressing resistance. I hear it all the time. And so part of, I think, what our job is working with these young people, speaking up for them, is to talk about that language does change, and that this is an important change to our culture and to our language. And it may take a while in some communities, and it may go faster in others. I'm always encouraged, at the center, you heard Mike and I both introduce our pronouns when we started this workshop. Where we work at the Los Angeles LGBT Center, it's very common. Every meeting is pretty much started when there's going to be people in the room that don't know each other to start by introducing our pronouns. And I'm always encouraged when I go outside of our little bubble and see other folks implementing that. I was in a meeting recently with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I heard a number of people introducing their pronouns, and I thought, that's fantastic. So this is something that is changing in our culture, and we want it to continue to change. So a little grammar lesson. What is a pronoun? Anybody want to type that in the chat? Any English teachers out there, how you would describe a pronoun? I'll give it a minute just to see if anybody wants to okay, good. That's great. Somebody put pronouns in their email signatures. That is really good. Well, I will tell you, a pronoun is a word that takes the place of a noun, a modifier of a noun, think you will. And in this case, it's someone's name. So we know that we make assumptions of pronouns all the time. So when we go to get a coffee at the local coffee shop, the way that the barista approaches us, or the way that we approach the barista, often they assume our pronouns. It happens at the coffee shop, it happens at the grocery store, it happens at the airport. We're always assuming we know people's gender based on, what is it? Their gender expression, right? The way that they express themselves outwardly, we're making assumptions about people's gender identity and the pronouns that they use. But just because these assumptions around pronouns are common, and sometimes they're accurate, it doesn't mean that they can't be harmful. So again, as we were just talking about, we often associate masculine people with he and him pronouns, and feminine expression with she and her pronouns. And there's also a singular and often gender neutral they, them, theirs pronoun that does not have the binary narratives associated with it. But a person's pronoun and soji, their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, are not always indicative of one another. Much like we each get to assert our titles, it's like Mr., Doctor, whatever we want to be called, the pronunciation of our names, we're very used to saying, oh, actually, my last name is not pronounced Mccleskey, it's pronounced Mccleskey. We get to say what nicknames we want to be called by. Once early on, I made the mistake of calling Mike Michael, and he was quick to correct me and say, no, my name is Mike. I don't go by Michael. Don't anyone call him Michael. We also get to assert our pronouns. And people of any soji, and like Mike said, we all have a soji, any gender expression, any gender identity, sexual orientation can have any set or combination of pronouns that they want. So we're typically taught the pronoun he and she. However, this can be very limiting. And in our world, when we're going through a gender revolution, I think everybody agrees that that's kind of happening in our culture, it can make folks feel like they have to pick a box. And this generation does not want to pick a box. They want to step outside the binary. We want to honor their autonomy. That's very important when working with youth, and it's essential to understand other pronouns that folks may use. So here's an example that you're probably doing this with they, them, that you don't even know that you're doing it. So assume that you are in a classroom and there's a bunch of young people in there, and everyone leaves, and there's a backpack sitting in there. The very first thing is, whose backpack is? Someone left their backpack. Do you think that they would mind if I took it to the office? I wonder who, let's see, yeah. So we're using they when we don't know that person, who that person is, whose backpack that is. We already do it. Someone left this banana there. Wonder if they would mind if I had a bite. So right, like we just use it all the time. And that is what we're encouraging folks to do with everyone before assuming their gender pronoun, to either call them by their name or to call them by they, them. It is a neutral way to describe it. I'm currently in the process of hiring in my agency. I get resumes and all the time. And so I often will say, I will often approach when I'm talking to another colleague about a certain applicant, they, them, because I don't know what pronouns that they use. So it's just a practice to start to do that before you get to know someone. All right, so I'm going to give you a scenario like we did earlier. And so the scenario is this. Sorry, let me move this. Jamie is a new youth to your agency. You want to make Jamie feel welcome and safe, but you are unsure of Jamie's pronouns. How would you initiate a conversation to make Jamie feel welcome and safe and find out Jamie's pronouns? So if you want to put your suggestion in the chat, how would you approach this particular scenario? Give everybody a minute to do that. I'm so thrilled people are putting questions in the Q&A. We will have time for sure to get to those. Model their behavior. This does go really fast. Let's see here, someone said, model their behavior by introducing yourself with your pronouns. I would introduce myself and state my pronouns and ask their name and pronouns. Ask Jamie what their pronouns are. Ask Jamie how they'd like to be addressed. Ask Jamie. Introduce my name and pronouns. All right, y'all have got it pretty well there. So yes, like I told you, you could be teaching a lot of this workshop with Mike and I. So if it was me, the way I would typically do it, and it's kind of what a lot of folks are saying. Hi, I'm Kevin. I use he, him, his pronouns. Welcome to the center. Can I ask what is your name and what your pronouns are? So again, I'm modeling it, saying my pronouns. I'm asking their name, what their pronouns are. And again, working with young people, you will hear a lot of things. You will hear, I go by he and they. I go by all pronouns. Some people say all pronouns. Some folks will a lot of folks who are a Latino heritage in our community will say, I go by she, her, and ella, the Spanish version of her. So again, it's new and it can be different, but it is affirming and it's honoring autonomy, and it is important for us to show the young folks, everyone, but in particular young people, that we see them, we hear them, that we're listening to them. And it's not just young people who are using they, them pronouns. Absolutely, no, for sure.
Just to take this language a little bit further, you know, about 10 years ago, when talking about pronouns really started to hit mainstream, a lot of people would say, what's your preferred pronouns, right? And over time, we've realized that pronouns are not preferred, but usually they're mandatory. We need to address someone, right? And so the community has pretty much changed from talking about preferred and moving and just saying, what are your pronouns? And so when we're looking at the terms transgender or trans, so these are the correct usage of terms here, right? Try to avoid using the terms transgendered, because that signifies something in the past tense and not necessarily appropriate use of the term. Also, not saying the word a transgender. The correct use would say a transgender person, a trans man, a transgender woman. Rather than using sex reassignment surgery, we would say gender affirming care. Right, it just is a more gentler approach in having these dialogues and really trying to affirm these folks' identity and just the language that they're using. We would say, if some assignment at birth, when we're talking about someone, we would say, oh, he was assigned female at birth. Let's say you're a medical professional or you're a teacher and you know there's something that you have to fill out. We would say he was assigned female at birth. We wouldn't say, oh, he was born a girl or he's actually a girl, right? If someone says that they're transgender, they are transgender, right? So it's really our own experience, again, in our brain, how we feel that we are. Some people have gender affirming care, others do not. Again, it's not about the body parts, it's about our brain and how we feel. And ask questions and avoid assumptions, right? So a lot of you are already working with youth. We are speaking to the choir here, but ask youth about their interests. Who's their role model? What kind of shows do they like, right? You're starting to build rapport with them in that capacity. And then as they start to share a little bit more with you, like their pronouns or their sexual orientation or their gender identity, right? Then those walls start to come down. Please try to avoid asking people what their gender identity are or sexual orientation and let them come to you. And finally, on this piece is reflect the language of the youth, right? So if the youth comes and tells you that they identify as non-binary or transgender, at that point, they're opening up to you, and that is appropriate then to ask some questions, to ask them what that means to them. Oh, what does that mean to you being non-binary, right? Because it might mean something different to that individual than to somebody else. And just to tie all of this up together with gender neutral language, when addressing groups of people, a big one, I am so guilty of saying, hey guys, right? I do that all the time. I know that a lot of youth, they're like, hey, we're not all guys, or, so, hey folks, hi friends. When you're talking to someone and asking them, do you have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Ask them, do you have a partner? Are you seeing someone special, right? Just these little tiny things can go a long way. And you're really starting to take actions of an ally by incorporating this type of dialogue into your conversations with youth, and you're being an upstander for the LGBTQ youth community by doing so. We know that a lot of this takes practice. A lot of times we make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as our intentions are genuine and we're leading with love, right? We're leading with care. We want to support and be inclusive.
I can't tell you how many times I have been in a gym class full of women and myself, and the instructor will say, okay, ladies, come on, push it really hard. And for me, it's like, I'm older, I'm like, whatever. But for a young person, if that had happened to me when I was younger, I would feel so embarrassed, kind of demoralized by, being identified as something that I'm not. So that's why we talk about this, that it's everywhere in our culture, and we're slowly trying to shift our culture to recognize and identify and affirm and honor everybody. So we would talk a little bit about the process of supporting youth who come out. So first of all, we want to speak about this in terms of a continuum. The coming out process, it's not a one-day thing. It's not something that just happens once. It's a lifelong process for all of us in the LGBTQ community. There's always going to be people in our lives who don't know the full extent of who we are, and we get to decide who to let in, when to let them in, and how much to let them in. Sharing, anyone who shares themselves with someone else, it's a gift. When you share yourself or part of yourself with someone else, it really is a gift. And we like to say that the coming out is also a letting in. Sometimes coming out can seem like we all have something to hide, which can be seen negatively. But in reality, we want to shift our experience to give us the power of choice and the agency over who we let in. We shouldn't ever have to feel like we are hiding something, but instead we're holding onto our piece of ourselves that we really cherish, and we are deciding who and when to let folks into our lives. So it's a choice. We want to give youth that choice. And when we work with young people, we see the importance of that. And they have a lot of questions about who is the right person to come out to and when is the right time to come out. Many youth wonder if they can be open with their parents about all this. We're in the middle of doing a really big research study on LGBTQ youth in Los Angeles, and we don't have all the results yet, but it's very interesting to see that most people are coming out in high school, we see, and they're coming out to friends and sometimes to teachers. So we have to really let folks choose when and who they do that. It is completely normal for you to feel very strong feelings around this topic of coming out. I think I can speak for myself. I for sure did. And we have a set of tools that we can use to support youth in navigating the process of coming out.
All right, so some reasons why folks might not come out, and then some benefits when people do come out. And we're having this dialogue because as Kevin mentioned, more and more youth are really seeking support around this topic, right? And it's not our place necessary to be like, come out to this person, don't come out to this person, right? They're the only one who really knows when it's that safe person or safe space or time to do so. So some reasons individuals might not come out. They might have internalized bias, right? So buying into society's messages that being LGBTQ plus is wrong. They might be fearful of violence or bullying. They might have that stress of hiding, right? They're hiding for so long that just taking that leap is very challenging. They might have fear of judgment. They might have fear of losing their loved ones. You know, we're talking about family rejection and friends, right? A lot of times people are not understanding. And so, you know, these are reasons why people may not come out or they might come out later on. But on the flip side, some benefits when people do come out, right? It's empowering. It promotes self-esteem. It can strengthen relationships, right? Because you're not hiding anymore. You're that authentic self that you are striving to be. You might feel closer to family and friends. You might now be looking to obtain support and services, right? So looking for those youth groups, looking for that LGBT community center. It gives the opportunity to start dating if one wants to. You know, there's no more time wasting by hiding all the time, and it allows someone to be their true self. And I can say that, you know, for me, when I didn't want to come out for all those reasons in the red at all. Like I was bullied in school, I was afraid, I was scared so much. But as soon as I did, like this huge weight lifted off my shoulders, and I was like, okay, now I can start to be the real person that I want to be, that I know myself to be, right? So we strive to really think about strength-based ways in our approach, right? And so we're going to go through some unsupportive answers that folks might hear when youth come out to them. And what we want to ask you all to do is in the chat, think of the strength-based answer instead of what's on the screen, okay? So a common thing that comes up when someone comes out and says, you know, I'm LGBTQ, a misconception will be like, are you sure? So what is a strength-based response that we could say instead of, are you sure? All right, I'm gonna, tell me what that means to you. Yes. What makes you think so?
Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for sharing this.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that if a young person came to us and said, and it was a female, and they said, oh, I'm going to ask this guy to the prom, we would never go, are you sure? Right? So we all want to make sure that we are treating LGBTQ folks the way that we would treat a straight person. All right, another example of something that might be said was if a youth comes out, someone might say, I think you are too young to make this kind of decision. What would be a strength-based response instead of saying something like that? You should be proud of your awareness. Your youth is empowering. Oh, that's good. I like that.
How about, why are you that way? I wish I had your strength when I was your age.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about what you're doing. Yeah, that's beautiful.
How can I support you? That's great.
Absolutely. I like this. All of us are different, and embrace your difference.
Mm-hmm. Another one that I have definitely heard for myself and for others is if some response being, I knew it, or I could tell. What's a different strength-based approach instead of saying I knew it or I could tell or something along those lines? I'm so happy for you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing. It's a kind of a lot of the past responses. Thank you for opening up.
How about I don't judge? Which
Mm.
just by saying I don't judge implies that they're judging. Oh, I don't judge.
Right.
Right? It's always great to be authentic. I'm glad you feel comfortable sharing that with me. How does it feel to share this?
That's great. Another response, and this, this doesn't have to be mean. I think some people don't mean to be mean when they say something like this, but they might say, "No, you're not," or "You can't be." Often you'll also hear people of the other opposite gender say, "Oh, that's a loss. It's a loss for all of us girls." So, what other strength-based approaches could we give instead of saying something like that? I mean, again, I think we're saying a lot of them already in the chat. A lot of these are really good and appropriate.
I think one I really like, because depending on if someone stereotypically seems LGBTQ or not, is, well, you don't look gay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jerry said once he reacted one of these ways and they just blurted it out because they weren't prepared. And absolutely, I mean, we're all going to say things all the time that are like not the right thing to say. And I think it's one of the reasons we do these trainings is that people have more of an awareness now. And once we say the thing that we probably shouldn't say, we can go back and say, "I'm so sorry. I'm so excited for you. Thank you for sharing this with me." So yeah, just kind of owning your mistake. It's the same thing when you misgender someone accidentally. Just own it, apologize, move on, be appropriate. Same idea. Is it me, Mike? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think you put these up here already. Saying things like, I don't care, or, "Oh, that's one thing. So I don't care." It usually takes so much courage and so much time and so much energy to come out to someone. And I know what someone is trying to communicate when they say they don't care is like, it doesn't affect how they feel about them. But this isn't something that should be brushed under the carpet for somebody who's coming out. It should be acknowledged. We should care. We should celebrate it. We should ask, like all of you are saying, what support. I care so much for you, right? It's very, the coming out process, like we can't overemphasize it enough. Even with the world changing and becoming more supportive, for the individual going through the process of coming out in a world where they're going to be the minority, they're going to be the different, they're going to be not heterosexual or not cisgender, it is important. And we do need people to care that they have made the choice to come out. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Thank you all for the really honest responses and just knowing that it's okay not to get it perfect, right? But that the care and the attempt is there.
Yeah.
Someone said, I gave a fist bump a few years ago and still cringing a bit over that, right? But you know what? These things happen. And so again, it's about intention.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about one more kind of strategy that you can do, and it's getting us back to our topic of LGBTQ youth and substance misuse. And this is called pod mapping for prevention. Maybe a lot of you have gone through this process before. In 2014, a group called the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective created this concept of pod maps to help you map out areas in your community you can turn to in cases of harm, isolation, and accountability. Building pods is a great way to build and prep resources to practice transformative justice in our communities. And so this means that when we're feeling isolated, we're going through a tough time, our mental health is maybe suffering. If we've done this process of building out a pod map, we can recall right away who we can go to and what is available and what resources are there to support us in times of need. These maps are very helpful to do with young people to help them identify supportive people in their coming out process as well. So we're going to go through this activity a little bit together, and you'll be able to recreate it with youth. So what we want you to do, and this is in, if you have a pad and paper, hopefully you have that nearby. You can also use your computer if you're gifted in that way. Take a sheet, take a moment and take a sheet of paper and draw similar circles to what you see on the screen right now. So draw, we want everyone to draw something that looks like what's on the screen right now. And then we're going to walk you through kind of building your pod map.
All right. So hopefully you had a couple moments just to jot down even a few of these, and we're just going to go through this. So the center circle will be yourself, right? Because this is going to be your map. This is going to be your community and your support network. So you would write your name in there. The surrounding bold ones, so those ones that are dark bold, these are going to be folks that you trust with your safety, who you can support in times of need. So these can be friends, a trusted adult, an understanding family member, siblings, anyone that's close to you. And so you're going to write names in each of those circles. And then the circles that are outside of those dotted line ones, these are going to be a little bit more movable, right? So they might be folks that you identify as someone that you might be able to talk to or that you kind of connect with, but you might need to build a little bit more rapport with them before moving them into that closer network. And then finally, the larger gray circles on the outside, these are larger networks, resources, support, right? So it could be places that you volunteer, it could be community centers, it could be youth spaces, right? So it's really identifiers within the community that youth can turn to should they need a broader support system, right? So if they need a therapist, if they need to get connected with other youth, right? These are what these are for. So when we've done this with youth and we've heard, like, a lot of times things are not drawn out, things are not in print anymore, right? Things are very digital and on a screen. But when they actually used a pencil or pen and filled this out, they said it was super helpful to just see this tangible item in just knowing who is their system and who they can turn to should they have a time of need, right? Or crisis, or even if it's just someone to be able to rely on, right? So these types of things go a long way in supporting our young people, just to really affirm that they're not alone, they're not isolated, but there is a community around them that's supporting them. So I want to thank you all so much for really participating, being interactive in the chat with us for the past hour and 15 minutes. We are definitely, I see lots of questions in the chat, and so we have plenty of time. I think we'll be able to get through all of these as much as we can. So I just, again, thank you for your willingness to be here, to be present, and just bringing your authentic selves into this space today.
Absolutely. I've been super impressed watching the conversation in the chat. So let's start with the first question. What if a youth is struggling with their identity and aren't sure what gender pronoun they want to use? First of all, it's very normal. So I think acknowledging that that is fine, that they might start with a pronoun, they might change that at another time. We try to give youth in life, we try to give them lots of space, right? Supportive space to discover who they are, and their pronoun is part of that. And so, yeah, I would say that the answer to that is to, you can say, well, you don't have to decide now what pronoun you're going to use forever. How do you feel today? What pronoun would you like to use today? Not assuming that they're going to change it every single day, but you might say, right now, what can I call you when I can't call you by your name? Obviously, you can call them by their name. You could suggest they, them, but I would probably just ask the young person, well, today, how do you feel? What would you like to use for right now?
Yeah. This next question says, is there a gender neutral term to replace sir or ma'am? I would love to be able to use it. So I actually just learned this past school year with students, because so they're using, it's MX and it's pronounced mix. And so I thought that was really unique that, there are terms out there. We just have to explore a little bit to find them. One term that we have talked about before, that we learned, was a gender neutral term for your niece or nephew is nibbling, right? And so there are lots of words that are coming about that are gender neutral and accessible for folks to be able to utilize.
The next question is, do you have a playbook for how you work with GSAs? I would love to work on a similar project, but I would not be sure how to support these groups. So we do have some best practices that we have developed. And I think we would probably, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think we'd be happy to share some of our best practices that we have found working with GSA groups, some of the things that we do, and some of the ideas.
Absolutely, yeah. You can, at the next slide that we have at the end, we have our contact info, and you can email us and we can get that over to you. And the next question is, do you have a toolkit that can be used on social media? It's a good one. Kevin? Anything?
Yeah, so, the best toolkit are the young people you work with, because first of all, they're going to tell you which social media that they and their friends use. They're going to tell you how to use it and how not to use it. So even if we had a toolkit for social media, it may not work in your community with the young people that you work with. It is very culturally specific. So really, we don't have one. We really rely on the youth that we work with to give us guidance on that. So I'd encourage you to do the same. The next question is, do you think the LGBT laws are implemented in parent and student handbooks? Great question. Again, it's very much going to depend on your school district. I think I would probably assume it's not. So that's why I think that we all need to do the work of understanding what the laws are. And again, those two resources, the websites that we gave you, will be really helpful. And then you can check and see, but I would not rely on the parent and student handbooks.
Yeah, and I would just to add to that, if you Google LAUSD's Human Equity and Diversity website, that department at LAUSD has done a lot and has put that online. And so that could be a model to kind of utilize as you're looking in your own community. So again, it's LAUSD Department of Human and Equity. And the next question is, are there GSA groups in middle schools, or is it unique to high schools? Yep, there are absolutely GSAs in middle schools. We work with middle schools. It's quite amazing how younger people are very sure of themselves and really are able to start having these conversations.
So the next question, do you know of an intersectional EB life skills training program for youth? First of all, I'm not sure what EB is. Do you know what EB means, Mike? Okay, I think it's okay. I know about both then, but looking for a training that is intentional about addressing evidence-based, thank you, about addressing intersectioning identities. So I don't know that this exists. I don't know if you know, Mike. I do know that we at the center are starting to develop some online trainings, and one of them will be about intersectional identities. So that's not out yet. We have a training right now that's all about being creating safe schools. And so that is something, again, if you're interested in, if you work at a school or work at a school district and you would love to have something that's accessible, it's a very low cost online 1-hour training we're best practices, and we're really proud of it. And we're going to have more trainings that we're going to be rolling out this year. So that does exist, but I don't know about one right off the top of my head.
A couple that are coming to mind to look at are Gender Spectrum. They do a lot of stuff around gender and identity, working with parents and youth. And the other one is Learning for Justice, which used to be called Teaching Tolerance. And I have been in one of their trainings before, and I do know that they really have an intersectional lens and approach in their work. The next question is, where's the best place to get data related to LGBTQ youth and substance use locally and nationally? So locally, we use the California Healthy Kids Survey. So check to see if there is a survey to your state and to your school system. Nationally, it's a very wide variety of things, but we were looking at the Human Rights Campaign did a survey with 10,000 LGBTQ youth a few years back. And it does have a lot of substance prevention in it. That's the only one nationally that's coming with such a wide amount of use.
And you could also look at the Trevor Project, just because that's a national organization that works with LGBTQ youth. They don't focus on substance misuse, but there's a lot of things they do focus on around mental health. Next question is, what is a safe pronoun to use if you're not sure from behavior or appearance? Well, first of all, we're never sure from behavior or appearance. So that was one of the things we were trying to get across, is that from someone's behavior or their appearance, we still can't guess. We should never guess pronouns. So I would say they and them is probably, if you can use their name primarily, but then I would use they and them until I knew how they identified. That would be my advice.
What is the best way to address an error you made when addressing someone and mistaking their pronouns by accident? Great question. So if you call someone he and they go by they, just acknowledge that you made that mistake. Oh, you know what, Tom, you go by they, I will get that right next time. Acknowledge it, don't over apologize, and then just move on.
Okay, I'm going to read their question. I've heard some people express anger over being assigned male, female, or intersex at birth. A child is born with male or female sex organs. Why is it derogatory to refer to them as male or female? They are babies. I'm not saying they can't change as the child grows, of course. So,
sorry, Kevin, Dare also added a clarification down at the bottom of the question list. And I do want to make sure about that as well.
I'm not referring to anger at the term assigned at birth, not a personal anger at being assigned, if that makes sense. I'm glad you put that clarification, because that is what I was going to address. So basically, I think you're saying, Dare, that there are folks who are saying, why assign at all at birth, maybe? Or yeah, I'm sorry, Mike. I don't know if I'm a little confused.
The things that I can clarify here are, so at least in our country at the moment, babies are not actually assigned intersex. So they're assigned male or female, but there are babies that are intersex when they have variations of genitalia or chromosomes, right? So it's not a derogatory term to refer to anyone as male or female, right? Again, gender identity starts to grow as we get older. And so it's really, once we're able to speak for ourselves and tell people how we identify, then to respect that language and reflect that once they're able to share that with us.
I know that there are some parents that their child is assigned a sex at birth, and yet the way they're raising the child is as gender neutral as possible, from their clothes to their toys to the books they read, that they're not assuming that that gender identity is the same as the gender expression, or the child, or I'm sorry, their biological sex is going to be the same as their gender identity. So yeah, that's a complicated one, and one that's interested in looking at. How are we doing on time? We have a few more minutes. Okay, good. Can you explain non-binary versus gender fluid? So, well, the first thing I would say is, whenever you meet someone who identifies as non-binary or gender fluid, to ask them kind of what that means to them. I think that's more important than any answer I might give you right now or Mike might give you. My general understanding is that somebody who identifies as non-binary is that they kind of see themselves outside of the binary of male and female, that they don't identify with either one of those two things, and that maybe they see themselves as encompassing all gender or no gender. So yeah, that would be the way I think that somebody who's non-binary would identify, is they don't identify as male or as female, they're outside of that. Gender fluid, I think a lot of folks would use that term when they go between and on the spectrum of from male to female and everything in between. That some days they might feel extremely feminine and want to express themselves as very feminine, traditionally feminine, and then other days very masculine, and some days androgynous, that they're on that spectrum and they go back and forth.
That was beautiful, Kevin. Our next question, doesn't the concept of being, in quotes, different automatically communicate a type of separation? As an example, I've heard of people comment that as soon as someone says something about their identity, it automatically creates some sort of uncontrollable reaction, whereas that would not have happened if the person would not have said that. So thank you for asking this. And I think the purpose of this dialogue is to try to understand and not differentiate people, right? But lead with love and compassion. So yes, you might have a reaction that's uncontrollable, you're caught off guard, you don't know how to respond. Again, I think the biggest thing was it's all about intention, right? If you're not illfully doing something and you're trying to communicate and provide resources, then that is okay. It's an okay way of being. And the other thing about being different is I think there's so many ways that we're all different from each other, right? That, it's about inclusive language, inclusivity in the way that we create spaces that's affirming to all people that are present.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any evidence-based practices specific for this population? I mean, I think the answer is absolutely. And I think that there's a number of organizations, and we're connected with one, that are doing a lot of research on LGBTQ youth. So the first one that comes to mind is out of San Francisco, and it's called the Family Acceptance Project. And so some of the things that we talked about today around family rejection were from their research. So the Family Acceptance Project in San Francisco, Dr. Caitlin Ryan is the person who led that research. But I also think there is our group CARE, Mike. They are working, it is headed by an epidemiologist who used to be at USC and is now just got placed at another school. But the focus of his work is on best practices for LGBTQ youth, and a lot of it is around substance misuse, and that is called the CARE consultation group. I think is it based out of Phoenix? So CARE, and that's an acronym that I can't tell you what it stands for, but C.A.R.E. So those are two things that come to mind for evidence-based practice.
How do you approach someone who is posting expressions on social media, but has not been open about her identity? So, I mean, in this case, if they're posting something that might seem like they're LGBTQ, right? You can like it, you can comment, but, tread lightly and, let them come out to you when they're ready, right? I mean, obviously, they might be an ally. We don't know, right? So we're not sure how this person identifies. So I would just say, let them come to you when they're ready.
Two questions about GSAs. So what would you suggest when trying to introduce GSAs in a rural area, and how do you access community readiness for a GSA group? So they're very similar. So I think when there is one student who wants to form a GSA, the community is ready. It may not mean the community is ready, but the community needs one. So in California, a GSA can only be started if there is a student or a group of students that want to start one, and they have an advisor at their school, a teacher or administrator who will be the academic advisor. We have to be invited onto the campus by the students to support them in the development of their GSA. So in a rural area or an urban area, again, I think you have to let the students know that you're there to support them and help them, because you really need it to be student-led and student-driven. And if there is one, ideally at least two students, and if they have a supportive teacher or administrator, you can join them and you can work with them. That is allowed. And you can start a group very small, and they can do small actions. And again, some of the, in our GSA best practices, we have a lot of examples of small things that we've done on campuses to support, even around Valentine's. For the small GSA, if it's just a couple kids, they could do a little booth that celebrates all love on that Valentine's Day. There's lots of little small things you can do. But again, you need to know, the students need to know that you are there to support them, and wait for, I would not recommend starting a GSA on your own as an adult outside of a school without students. I don't think that's even allowed. It's not in California.
How can we address stigma placed on non-binary gender expression and non-binary orientation, such as bisexual, pansexual, etc., individuals, including by individuals of the LGBT community? So my first thing would be to start to normalize that dialogue, right? Bring references into your conversation about non-binary people, about trans people, right? About orientations that you might not talk about every day. And that could be in a variety of ways, depending on the setting that you're working in, right? So if you're working with a youth group, bring in ideas about public figures, right? If you're in a school setting, talk about historic figures, right? Non-binary and trans people have been around forever, and it's just about really finding these spaces and being able to have this dialogue to, and I'm going to use the word to normalize the conversation and the verbiage. On our website, which is here, there's one tab called Out for Safe Schools, and under that there is a set of history lessons that are LGBTQ history, and so that could be a good place to start to kind of look at different figures and incidences from the past.
I just want to thank Chris in the chat, who is addressing a question about non-binary and gender fluid identities. And Chris is a non-binary person. And so what they said is, I would say non-binary is an umbrella and gender fluid people fall under it. Agree with that description. Thank you, Chris. But there are lots of non-binary identities. Examples are agender and bigender. So thank you, Chris. That's hopefully the message was, talk to someone who identifies as non-binary or gender fluid and get their opinion. Are there evidence-based curriculums for parents of LGBTQIA? We primarily are a youth serving organization. Many people have referenced PFLAG in the chat, so I would say that PFLAG would be a really great place to look for different curriculum to support parents of LGBTQIA folks. And wow, it is 11:30. We got through every question, Mike. Y'all are amazing. That was fantastic conversation and questions.
Thank you all so much for having us here. It's been a pleasure to connect with you all across the country. You can follow us on Instagram, email us, check us out online.
Kevin and Mike, thank you so much for this incredible webinar today. I saw a couple of comments in there where they said this has been one of the best webinars that they've seen discussing this topic. And so thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your time with us. We so appreciate it. Folks, I have put the evaluation link in the chat box, so you can go ahead and you can complete that. If you, for some reason, aren't able to access your certificate, just shoot us an email at training@cadca.org, and we will make sure that you get that in the next couple of days. But thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Everyone stay safe, and we'll talk with you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.